Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. I have on the line Lesley, who is in level 22 of the course, and she has kindly agreed to talk about her experience on the course and in learning Chinese. But before we get into anything specific about the Mandarin Blueprint course, Lesley, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and why you started to study Chinese.
Yeah, I'm Lesley. I am living and working in Beijing. And obviously it's like, I just don't want to you can stay in that expat bubble where you can, I remember there was a funny meme. It was like, after 5 years in China, man bravely passes HSK1. And I just don't want to be, right? Yeah. And I've got the survival part down, but it's frustrating when, you can't like communicate with the lunch lady or, your Kung Fu instructor. Right. Understand, like, people stop to ask you directions and you're like, huh? I don't know. It's just, I don't want to be in that expat bubble, especially in Beijing. You can, but.
Right. Yeah. I used to live in Beijing for a couple of years, and during that time, I didn't learn Chinese. Yeah, because
right.
It was so easy to get away with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's such a huge
and
expat community there that you'll have lots of different activities you can do. There's like a whole economy of expats, so it's definitely possible to avoid the Chinese. So good on you for not falling into that trap. That's great.
Yeah. I'm trying. I don't want to be that guy if I can help it.
Gotcha. So had you so you want to make sure that you're able to participate more in the society around you, not just be in the expat bubble. So have you tried any other methods for learning Chinese in the past? I mean, you said you learned some survival Chinese, which you could probably just pick up eclectically, but did you take any other attempts at learning Chinese before Mandarin Blueprint?
Well, I think the more accurate question is, what didn't I try? Oh my God. Yeah. I tried a Chinese teacher, and I don't really vibe with the local study methods of rote learning. Sure. Even with your guys' course, and the memory palace things really work, and it's amazing how the props reinforce it. It's still daunting, it's still an undertaking. I can't say I'm excited every day to sit down, but I tried a couple local teachers. I tried a couple different courses. I did the usual suspects, the apps, but they weren't worth my time investment. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I admire what Duolingo is doing, but it just wasn't worth the time. I just wasn't getting. It's just a lot of repetition, and that just doesn't stick for me. So it's like time I could be doing something else in the morning. So I've tried all of them, seriously, man. There's not one I can't give you some kind of an opinion, not just based on hearsay, actually having tried it, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. That's a story we hear a lot, because one of the problems, we were just checking out Gabriel Weiner's awesome app called Fluent Forever, which doesn't have Mandarin, but it does have a number of other languages.
No.
And we were checking it out. It's really great. It's really interesting. But we realized, we were like, but one of the problems here is that Chinese has this extra stage that other apps, their basic structure doesn't adapt for. So if you need to learn Chinese and you want to learn Chinese properly, or really, let's just say you want to learn any language properly, you need to be able to read and listen to stuff you can understand. And reading is especially effective, but you can't just start reading Chinese. And so without that structure at the beginning to make sure that you're staying within the realm of what you can understand and just, learning character by character as opposed to word by word, which is how most language apps do it, then, you end up in the situation where the app gives you the freedom to do whatever you want, but it's almost like too much freedom, because you can't, like with French, I could start reading French today if I wanted to, or I could start reading some Spanish today, but you can't really do that with Chinese. So you can't have that eclectic, like click on any word and find the definition. And, it's way too complicated for that. So that's a story we've heard a lot. So when did you find Mandarin Blueprint, and what sort of was different about it for you?
I must say, the Fluent Forever, he's the one who got me turned on to Anki.
Oh yeah.
So I give him Yeah. And when did I find you guys? I was actually about to give up. It just,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
like, I just, not, yeah, seriously. And I was on Facebook. And so it's actually, see, like, good things can come from, killing time on Facebook. And I saw your guys' ad, and anytime I saw any ads for Chinese, I would always just check them out.
Mm,
And I had read this book, like Encoding Chinese, about memory palaces. And so when I
mm,
looked at your sort of free little demo, you were incorporating, the stuff that Fluent Forever talked about that I liked. You were incorporating the memory palaces. And I was like, oh, plus the promise of literacy, because it's one thing to speak it, but I used to volunteer teaching people who were trying to learn to read in the States, and that's just a terrible way to go through life, like surrounded by text that you can't understand.
right.
So, and I had kind of just given up. I was like, I'm never going to get Chinese, and I'm definitely never going to understand the characters.
Mm.
So and then you guys took WeChat Pay, because if
Oh,
you've ever worked and lived in China, you know that, transferring money is a thing. So I had all my money here. You were like, yeah, we'll take WeChat Pay. It's amazing people who don't. Very short-sighted if you're going to speak, teach Chinese. So I
yeah.
was like, screw it, I'll try it. Yeah, yeah. So you guys were kind of my little life preserver being thrown out, I guess, at just the right time. Because literally I was about to be like, all right, I'm just not going to stress about this anymore, because it would bum me out that I
Yeah.
couldn't even past the basic things. So
Mm.
it's like, well, either do it or just don't, but stop being in this gray area. But it's really hard if you don't. I can't do it I just don't have the energy for rote. If you have a full-time job, there's no way you have energy for rote learning.
A comment on the point you made about how the sort of the not having the energy for rote learning, and then also just feeling like you want to give up. It's like Chinese has such a low success rate, and I think a big part about it is because it's not just that it's a longer language to learn, it's that you don't have a clear path to get there. And you mentioned earlier that it's not like it's not still an undertaking to learn Chinese, but if you at least know the next step is not going to throw me, like the next step is not going to make me go, oh, I can't possibly handle this next step. And you just know, okay, it's a lot of steps. Maybe there's if there's 10,000 steps to learning Spanish, maybe there's 20,000 steps to learning Chinese. But it's
Right.
still, at least with the problem with not having a clear path is you don't know where to go next. You're just lost in the dark. So it's like, it's not only is it a lot of steps, but am I even going in the right direction? So it can be quite frustrating in that way. So I'm glad to hear that we got you out of the feeling of just wanting to give up. So tell us about how that came to
Yeah.
be the case, because I mean, sure, we could have just been another one of those Chinese courses that's like some of the other apps you mentioned, and maybe was slightly interesting for a little bit, but then just brought back the feeling of wanting to give up. So what was different about Mandarin Blueprint for you?
Well, I think, like I said, I'd read that book, Encoding Chinese, so I was aware of the memory palaces, and I had done a bunch of my own flashcards, and I just did not enjoy it. And I remember the Fluent Forever guy was like, I really love doing flashcards. I'm like, oh man, we are cut from different cloth. And you guys have these awesome Anki decks. Like, it's amazing how much work you did on those. Those Anki decks are amazing. So I think what kind of not sold me was listening to Luke, just that opening part where he's like, blah, 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 this could be you. It's like, yeah, right, shut up. But his pronunciation, and the fact that you said you use memory palaces so that you could fix your tones, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had this experience. Like, I remember I went to the bank to change money, and I really did my best to get those tones right. And the guy just looked at me. They'll look at you and be like, huh? I remember I went to a coffee place, and I was like, coffee, and he was like, huh? And I'm like, really? So
Yeah.
that just, and this is after I'd been doing you guys for a while. So then I spoke to him. I was like, oh, we can do this in French since my tones aren't, oh, we can do it in German. And I think yeah. So, yeah, it was the memory palaces and Anki. and listening to you guys just speak in a way that people weren't like, there's a clip of you pitching your um, Mandarin
little
Blueprint to
speech about the
investors.
course. Yeah.
Yeah, and just watching them, instead of nodding their heads or looking at you like, oh, or then you get overly praised for saying ni hao. It's like, oh, shut
Right.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so annoying. And just like you're comfortable and you're like, yeah, I sound like an American, but I'm intelligible to locals, and you could tell that from they were just, caught up in the content of what you were saying. So I think it was those three things actually: the memory palaces, the Anki, and then watching the locals' reaction to you guys speak. It obviously wasn't staged; it was just B-roll from the event. So
Right.
people were just being themselves. It's probably those
Yeah.
three things.
That is a great feeling, by the way, when in any language, when you're acquiring the language, it's when you get to that point where you realize, oh, okay, the person is no longer engaging with me on the level of like, oh, you're trying to speak Chinese. Like you're now
Yeah.
engaging with me on what I'm actually saying. And it's kind of funny how
Yes.
quickly that happens now. Like, so even just yesterday, my friend and I were on a run, and we got to an intersection and we had to wait for a red light. And this guy next to us was saying, like, oh, there's more and more foreigners around here doing exercise. And I just took it as an opportunity to speak to him and just be like, yeah, I love to exercise. And then he was like, wow, you speak Chinese. And then very quickly I like asked him about how long he's been in Chengdu and whatever. And it's like flabbergasting to them in a way, but then they're really excited because then they're like, oh, cool. So like, where are you from? And what, it's kind of funny that the reaction to me saying I'm American has changed a little bit recently because I guess of geopolitical things going on, but they're still super friendly. It hasn't like,
Yeah.
it's only gone from maybe they would make a comment and say like, America's the best. Maybe they don't say that now, but so
Yeah. But yeah, when they
it's a
actually
great
just
feeling.
engage in the content rather than either you're like oh, you say ni hao, or you're at the bank to change money and then to just stare at me and be like, huh?
Right. Yeah.
That it can be super off-putting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice to feel less off-put, because I do feel like it is an undertaking, especially because of the tones. Honestly, just
Mm-hmm.
hitting the tones, and B, remembering them, because it just completely changes the
Mm-hmm.
meaning. I mean,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, there's a great story about this. My friend Kelsey, from when she was on the show Fei Cheng Wu Rao. Well, I also was on that show one time. It's basically a dating show, and they shoot it in Nanjing, and she was on the panel of like girls who keep their lights on or they turn their lights off, and like a guy comes up and they decide whether or not they like them, and they'll talk to him and all that. And she meant to say, I like a guy. She's American. She meant to say, I like a guy who likes adventure, and that's Mao Xian. And so fourth tone, third tone, Mao Xian. And then she accidentally said Mao Xian, second tone, fourth tone, which means I like a guy who enjoys yarn, because that's Mao Xian is yarn. So that was a pretty
and
embarrassing moment for her on
knitting
national
is a
television.
thing.
Yeah. And it's so you think that these small changes, but I think that the my best advice for you there is to keep practicing the tone pairs that we talked about in the pronunciation mastery. So
Every day.
yeah, good,
Yeah.
excellent. Yeah, you keep doing that, you'll eventually. It's just because those patterns they come up all the time, and so eventually it'll just become second nature. But and like you said, it sounds like you're doing it every day. So how's your experience been so far of like keeping the consistency day to day? Because that's, in my opinion, if you don't have that, it's really hard to succeed. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think you actually said something that kind of made a click go for me. You're like, it's a habit to get you to the finish line. You're like, protect the habit at any cost. And I was
Right.
like, oh. And I actually use that. Like I teach English high-end, spendy, Beijing spendy people, and I've used that line on them. I'm like, the habit will get you there. And that, so it makes me feel less bad, because some days, like, I'm just not one of these, like, I like Chinese culture, I train kung fu, I'm here, like, but I'm not like over the moon about learning Chinese. Because I just have found it. I guess I've found it so daunting that I'm just
Right.
tired.
Yeah, it can actually create
So
negative feelings. So yeah.
the days when yeah, and it's like this baggage, how you have a resentment towards the language, I'm not sure, but um, so when you said that I know, right? You said the habit is what you need to protect because the habit will get you there. I was like, okay, so some days I never have a 0 day anymore after you said that.
Mm,
And I feel a lot less bad because I was like, all right, the habit is the baby I don't want to throw out with the bathwater here. Did I
right.
feed the baby today? Yeah, I didn't, give it as much nourishment. It got junk food today, but it's still in play. It's not cold. So that
Yeah.
was tremendously helpful bit of advice for me when you said that. Protect the habit, as the habit will get you across the finish line. So that switched my focus from like, oh, I didn't do 5 characters today because I have a little set thing. I'm using that November novel month is my November productivity month. I switched it a
Nice.
bit, and I do a certain number of characters, or I cover a page every day. That's my goal
Mm.
for Protective Nov Pro. Um, but I really focus more though on protecting the habit. Yeah, that was hugely helpful.
Oh, I'm glad
Bit
to
of
hear it. Yeah, that was sort
insight.
of stuff that really stuck with me on a number of different levels, including like, so I just recently this past weekend I participated for the first time in my life in this type of event, which was called a cabrathon, which is like it's a triathlon, but instead of it being whatever the normal triathlon is, it was cycling, kayaking, and running. And on a few
Oh
occasions, I
wow.
actually had myself thinking about those types of things on the smaller scale of like, these 5 hours while I'm doing this exercise. But it was
Right.
thinking like, okay, don't, right now go for the fastest speed on the kayak at this moment because you still have, you know, 20 kilometers to go. So you need to just keep the flow going of the paddling. And it's sort of a metaphor a bit for, well, in that case, not really a metaphor, it's actually happening, but it's a bit of a analogy to what it's like to build up a skill, because you can always want to be like, okay, well, I want today to be the day where I have that equally super productive day. Like you have some perfect golden day one day where you learn 30 characters easily and you're in a great mood and all that. And then your brain does this annoying thing where it goes, well, that's what every day is like now, right? And then it forgets that sometimes you're tired, you're stressed about something else, or whatever the situation, you're sick or something. And then it's like our brain goes, well, if I didn't reach the top of my potential ability, then I might as well just quit. It's this weird, like, illogical thing that our brain wants to do. And I do it all the time. But like,
Yeah.
for some reason, I was luckily able to get it with Chinese where I went, it doesn't matter. Just do something. Just do something today.
Right.
And that was largely inspired by Katsumoto as well, and his website, All Japanese All the Time. So
Okay.
glad to hear that was
Yeah.
helpful for you.
Yeah,
So
and I mean, sometimes it's like when the way you say it, or when the teacher's ready, or when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, type thing. But
mm,
yeah, that was yeah.
yeah.
And like I said, I've passed it along to my own students. So
Excellent. Excellent. The good news is spreading around. That's awesome. So the good news of habit
trying
building.
to, yeah, yeah,
So the
right.
next area I wanted to talk to you about is specifically the character learning, because this is the area where Mandarin Blueprint's probably our strength, is the character learning system. And so I'm curious about how that process has gone for you. You're in level 22, so that means you're in now I guess you're in phase 4 of the course now, where you're going to start to have some longer
Yes.
form content. But uh, phases 1, 2, and 3, and well, all the phases have the character learning as a part of it. So kind of a twofold question. One is like, about how long into the course did you feel like it took before you really understood the character learning method? Like that is to say, like, how many characters did you have to learn before you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I see what needs to be done here for each character. Do you have a number on that? Probably like 20 characters, 50 characters, something like that.
Yeah, I'd say within the first 50. 'Cause I kind of didn't really understand like the why I was using the child at home, the female character. So I just went with it.
So how long did it take you when you were going through the first two phases of the course before you felt like you really understood how the character method worked? So that, when you do the first 10 characters, a lot of times people are like, okay, this is a brand new way of learning. So it's a little bit complicated, but eventually you kind of get the hang of it and you're like, okay, no problem. I understand what I have to do for each character. About how many characters that take before you felt like you had a good grasp of the method?
Um, yeah, probably 25 to 30 characters. And
Yeah.
basically, I just followed your instructions and was like, you know what, I'm sure it'll become clear. And it
Mm.
did. It did. And I remember the first, but what I didn't anticipate was how having props for the characters would reinforce learning the character. Because I remember one in particular was my prop for a manly man is Clint Eastwood. And there was a scene I had, a movie scene, where Clint Eastwood had a notebook and he was talking to Tina Fey about her body. And I remember seeing the character with Clint, I was like, Clint Eastwood in a notebook. What was he doing? Oh yeah, talking to Tina Fey, body. I knew the tone, and that was cool. Like to
Yeah.
reverse engineer the character and have the character like bring the props bring the character up. So that the first time that happened is when it kind of like clicked. I'm like, oh yeah, this is really cool. It's not just about literacy, but those reinforce the actual characters, those little stories. And
Yeah.
it's really nice to be able to read a menu or, to read a price list. Yeah.
Sure.
Just common
Sure.
ads, Yeah. But that
Yeah.
that was, I think, where the click occurred for me.
Yeah, it's so cool how like you can. It's what I would say it's analogous to is like if you walk by a store or a coffee shop or a place that you haven't been for a while, and you just look over at it as you're like walking down the street, you can suddenly be flooded with
Hmm.
memories of things that have happened in that place, and that's like walking by
Right.
my old elementary school or something, and I see just
Right.
memories from elementary school jump in there, and
Right.
that's it's the same thing. It's just instead of it being a real memory, it's just a manufactured memory, but it's still,
Right.
you can still remember Clint Eastwood standing there with the notebook talking to Tina Fey. So like
Right.
it worked, your
Right.
brain can't seem to make the distinction. And so that's why it's all been a game of figuring out, okay, what are all the ways to make these manufactured memories even more memorable by thinking about how memory
Right.
works. And so it's
Right.
I use it all the time in life now, like that particular skill, because it just helps with um just remembering things like people's names, or like I met a guy last night
Yeah.
who was from Bangladesh, and his name was Abash, which is like not a Western name, but I was just like, okay, Bosch. Well, Bosch makes me think of Chris Bosh, the NBA player, and so I
Right.
just was like imagining a bunch of them and being like, pick a Bosch from as if they were like you could just pick one of
Nice.
the
Yeah.
Chris Bosches, and then I just remembered his
Yeah.
name as a result of that, and it's like all of that stuff, it applies more universally than just Chinese, but obviously it's very useful for Chinese characters because it fits so well. So speaking of
Right.
that kind of idea, so how long now, approximately on average, does it take you to learn one character? That is to say, the meaning and the pronunciation and the components, so that you could therefore write it. How long does that take these days?
The scenes when I sit down in the morning and do my page, I have one of those like Hansa notebooks, and I do my initial stuff on the backside, and then when I do my review, I use the part with the Chinese characters. Um, you can do those scenes pretty quickly. Like I remember the first, after you stop the video and you have the things like what the component parts are, and then you make your own movie. Just doing it on my own sort of was a bit of a slow start, but I don't know. It's like anything, you do it every day and you get
Mhm.
better at it. I've learned if I make it exceptionally weird or exceptionally funny or just wrong, that
Yeah.
like the character for Long. I remember the other day I did that one, and it's Charlie Sheen as my character, and
Hmm.
so there may or may not have been long lines of blow on the ice skates.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember being like, oh yeah, the ice skates and the loud Charlie, yeah, Long. Okay, done. Because there's that
Isn't
funny
that great
thing
when
with,
your actor
Chong.
works
Yeah.
perfectly with the
Yeah.
idea? Yeah. It's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, he may or may not have caused a lot of mayhem, and the long line, but the long lines of blow that made me laugh when I finally connected that. When I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, I could not share on the actual course about 30% of my scenes would be not safe
yeah,
for it's not safe for work. So I
no,
just we just
anything, right?
keep it family friendly in the
Yeah,
actual course. But yeah, so many things are memorable about whether it's like violence or sexuality or drugs or something. There's ways to incorporate all that stuff while and that just makes it memorable, especially if you laugh. If you find a way to laugh, then
yeah.
you're going to stick with it. Luke and I used to
Well,
be studying together, and we would just break out laughing randomly
yeah,
as we're
yeah,
sitting silently
yeah,
across from each
yeah. They're fun. Now, the one thing I moved a lot as a kid,
other.
so it's like I realized when I was doing different housing, the different locations, that I had some trouble with. So I learned that, like, there was one period in my life, like, I used to love the Pink Panther. So I always make sure when I have a scene there that one of the character that does the pronunciation, the tone, is somehow interacting with those different props from
Yeah,
different places. And that was because I had some troubles initially, because I know it's like how you block stuff out from your childhood. um so that I had to mean, that's just by doing it every day, you pick up stuff, but that's helped. And then, like you had said, it's if it's gory or just funny or wrong, those are definitely, I'm getting better at making them really super weird. And then the
yeah,
recall is fast, because I'm like, oh yeah, that's Freddie Mercury doing that bizarre thing in Bucharest. That was one of mine when I was in Bucharest, is one of my
yeah.
and so, oh yeah, it was near. And I think my favorite scene, there's two of them that you guys did, one of which was an undertaking where he's using one finger to pluck a chicken, or a rooster, like the undertaking of the foam finger. It's
Yeah,
just, yeah, it's some of those are really funny. And then the one for chaotic, where it was like a tongue in a toilet and a meat hook. I've never forgotten that character. It was just like, oh, this is so wrong and so funny, and you don't forget it. Yeah. So
yeah,
those were, I think, my two favorites, the ones when you guys were doing the video part.
yeah, yeah. We're adding more videos to the later sections of the course too soon. So
Oh,
keep a
cool.
lookout for that. But
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So so far it sounds like you said that you've had some real world impacts, like you've been able to read more of the menus that you've seen around and like seen
Yeah.
some things, characters around. And I mean, you're still
Yeah.
kind of early in level 22, but like, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like things you've noticed in your real life that have sort of changed, especially since you're in Beijing?
Yeah, like the whole, I do like your focus on, you don't know a word until you see it in context. And I
Right.
have to say, Ma Shang, your whole thing about Ma Shang has been really helpful. Like, we have a front door guy. So I Ma Shang'd him the other day because I was like, didn't feel like dealing with some cool package or whatever. And I was like, oh, Ma Shang, I'll be, and the fact that it came out of my mouth, I Ma Shang'd him, he understood. I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah. It was just a little taste, because I'm still having
Yeah.
trouble with the speaking portion. But it's, and it's funny, it's not linear. It'll just suddenly pop, like you'll know the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a
yeah,
really
that's
weird
been cool.
phenomenon. Like the way that it happens is
Hmm.
like you're reading and you're listening and you're reading, and then it just comes into your head because is how it is in your native language. It's
Right.
not like you know ahead of time everything that you're going to say. It's like it comes
Right.
really soon before you actually say it. And it's like it's pretty much
Yeah.
imperceptible. It just feels as if I'm
Yeah.
discovering what I'm going to say as I'm saying it. So it's like the if you're doing the language acquisition correctly, the same thing should happen when you're in your second language. So eventually you go and the situation warrants something being said, and your brain just goes, okay, what's the pattern of sounds that will make that person understand? And it just
Right.
comes. And it's kind of cool. And so you just keep
Yeah.
going with the context and the flashcards and the longer form text, and eventually, it just keeps happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Your advice to just show up. I was like, yeah, I can do that. Because, like I said, I'm not the most enthusiastic example, but I definitely don't want to leave China without being conversant. Like, I just feel like that would be an opportunity missed, and it's hard, but
Right.
yeah. So I try not to be too grim about it.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
have to admit, some days I'm like, I do feel a little grim, but then I bang out my little page worth, and
Mhm.
then some days I feel really excited, like it'll just, like you say, it'll click, and all
Yeah.
the levers are working in a fluid fashion, and I'm like, oh, this is doable. And then other days I was like, God, I just learned that this morning, and what was that? So
Mhm, mhm,
yeah,
mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's always seems
it's
to be how it goes. It's like it's kind of like the stock market. It's sort of going up and down while generally going up in terms of your mood about it and
yeah,
your feelings about your own abilities and all of that. Uh, uh, I still have that feeling, from time to time about my own Chinese abilities. Like one day I'll be like, wow, I sure do know a lot of Chinese. And then the next day I'll be talking to somebody about a topic that I'm not particularly fluent in. And I'll be like, oh man, what am I doing teaching Chinese classes? I didn't even know what to say at this point. And it's like, it was actually super niche and it was completely reasonable that I didn't know, but still you'll have those like up and down feelings. But the main thing again is like, as long as surrounding those emotions is but I'm still doing it every day, then it
yeah,
doesn't really matter. You're gonna eventually
yeah,
get, get better.
exactly.
So, um,
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you that 80% of it is showing up and doing
mhm.
whatever it is you need to do, regardless of how you feel about it,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So,
which is probably a good thing.
yeah, yeah, to some degree, there are certain days where it's like the no 0 days versus 0 days off mentality. So my 0 days off mentality is much more like go getter. I'm gonna do a lot today and just never take. It's like 0 days off. It sort of has this more active sort of feel to it. But then other days I have to use the no 0 days mentality, which is like, okay, I'm overwhelmed. There's got a lot going on right now, but I'm just gonna make sure it's not zero so I don't lose the habit. And you just fluctuate between those
Exactly.
two, and then like that's usually how it goes. So cool, awesome. Well, this is really interesting to hear what you've had to say about the course and like your experience. It's really so happy for you that you've gotten a new lease on learning Chinese after considering quitting before. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious if you have any suggestions for us of how we could make the course better, so that like if there was anything you came across and you're like, oh, I wish that they had this, or if you have any suggestions for us.
The only because I'm still shaky, even though I do all my stuff. It's like when the pinion first gets removed, I have to go back and forth to pleco a lot
Mm,
to make sure I've got the tones right. But it's like I'm not going to say it's annoying, but sometimes I wish initially when you first see a word, it's from before the other component. Yeah, I'll have to switch in and out of pleco a lot,
okay.
But I mean, that's a small stupid thing. It's not really a complaint.
Well, no, I mean, that's good to know. I mean, so you're saying when you first learn a new word, even if
Yeah,
you knew the characters before, just maybe on that
yeah.
page, having the pinion for the word would help you a
Just for
bit.
the tones, yeah, because it would just because sometimes I remember with to reach the way and way that took me a while, and I was like, shit, is that the second tone one or the fourth tone? No, it was Homer in
Right.
the bathroom, so it's got
Mm,
and and then I'm like, God damn it. That would just be a little sort of helpful the very first time you learn a new word, if it's especially if the second part of that is from before,
right. Right.
from the
Yeah.
distant
And also,
miss.
the
Yeah,
yeah, sometimes the word has a secondary pronunciation. Sometimes, as is exampled in "imwei" or "imwei," you can have either one.
yeah,
So it's like,
yeah,
well, I've thought of that before. It's like it might be a good idea for us. Yeah, like you said, the first time you learn a new word, have the pinyin there available.
yeah.
Obviously, our theory was you've learned the character through the Henza movie method, but that's
Oh
assuming that
yeah,
the word, because I mean, Anki and the Henza movie method has a retention rate of about 90 to 95%, which is good, but it's not perfect. So what if it happens to be that you're in that 5 to 10% forgetting range when you're learning the new word? Then you might be like, or you're
yeah,
just not quite sure you actually had it right. You're like, oh, I think it's way, but I'm not, was it way? And then you check and
right.
you were right, but still the fact that you were uncertain meant that you had to go to pleco. So that makes sense. That's a good
Yeah.
suggestion.
Okay. Like I said, I'm not complaining, but I'd rather be focused on the word than going to pleco, because I have to go in and out of, I don't know. But yeah,
Yeah.
but then it'll stick. It's like, oh, okay,
Nice. Nice. Awesome. Well, I guess my final question then would just be, would you recommend the course to anybody out there who might be listening to this or viewing this? And, if so, why or why not?
Actually, I have a question for you, which
Sure.
is I would without reservations and recommend Mandarin Blueprint, and I have.
Hmm.
And the objection I always get, and I'm not really sure how to address it, is, oh, that
Hmm.
sounds really involved. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, Mr. 5 years in Beijing, HSK1, how's your method going? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Right.
But
Right.
um, you know what I mean? Like, so they'll tell you it sounds really involved. And I'm like, actually, once you kind of get it, it's not. It's
Hmm.
methodical. I
Sure.
would love to know, like, how do you, because I feel bad if people are letting the fact it feels overwhelming not have them, because the price is right and your approach
Hmm.
is right. Like, how do you address that in a way that makes people want to explore it rather than being like, wow, that sounds really involved? It's like, oh, be
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And of course, we've thought a lot about that. And, one of the things that I think of is first, you need to be sure that you recognize, what is involved in learning Chinese. Like I remember when I was in Beijing originally, I met a guy from Iceland who had learned Mandarin. At the time, I didn't know much at all. And I asked him about it. And the first thing he said is like, it takes a while. Is you got to be prepared for it to take a while. So like, and that's because there's a lot of steps. Now that doesn't mean that you couldn't take the most efficient route through those steps, which is what Mandarin Blueprint's trying to do. We're trying to, hence why we called the company Blueprint. It's like, here's where you go. Mapping Mandarin was another idea we had for the name of the company, because it's like, you can't lower the amount of steps, but you can make it so that each step is not the wrong one and you're heading in the right direction. So the first thing you have to
Yeah.
recognize is, do you want to do this? Do you want to learn Mandarin? And if you do, then okay, then the next question is, what's necessary to learn Mandarin? Well, you have to know the characters. You have to know the characters if you want it to be not full of homophones, because the pronunciation only has 420 syllables. So you need to know the characters. And it's also the part of the language that has the most patterns for you to recognize, for your brain to naturally recognize. So if you only had to learn 100 characters, it would not be worth spending the time to learn a mnemonic system, because it's only 100 things. You could probably memorize those. But like you said, you learned how to do the method in about 25 to 30 characters, right? Well, that's 1% of the amount of characters that you need to learn overall. Probably about 3,000 is really where you want to go. If you want to be able to like read the newspaper and stuff, you can do 600 and be able to get by in loads of situations. But if you want to be able to read a book, you're going to need about 3,000 characters, right? So if it only takes 1% of the characters to learn a method that makes learning the other 2,970 characters really fast, well, that's worth it, So, um, but the question is, but you have to remind people that it's like, you still have to learn 3,000 characters though. And you can't, even if it's 30 seconds per character or 1 minute per character, that's still, 3,000 minutes. It's a lot of time. You're not going to do it overnight.
Yeah.
So as long as people are like, I'm committed to it and they understand the steps involved, then Mandarin Blueprint's definitely the fastest way. But it's like, I get why people say it sounds really involved, but they just need to see it in the larger perspective, I think.
Yeah, because I have my little notebook where I have put in it, because I had wanted like one stop. For me, I remember reading one time, they said if you want to remember things, you handwrite it. So I have it in my Anki, obviously, but to not be on my screen all the time. I do a lot of review, just and it's got like because sometimes I'll forget my locations. I have those in the front. So every character, I don't know. I find it really helpful to have my little book. But
Sure.
I don't know, people are funny though. They're like, yeah, it just seems so involved, and it's like, well, that's because it is. But yeah, if
Yeah.
you ever come up with like a quickie little elevator speech for getting around that stupid hesitation, because I do recommend it, but people are just put off by, I think because it's an unusual approach. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking of it in math. It's like it'll take you about 30 characters to get the hang of the method. And so those 30 characters might take you 10 minutes a character because you're figuring it out. But then you now have 2,970 characters to go, and you have a power tool that you just installed in your brain. You know, it's like, that's another analogy that I use sometimes, is like, imagine that you have to build a house and you've got two tables. One table has conventional tools, hammer, saw, nails, and then there's some wood. And then you can immediately get started because the tools are fine. The other table has an unassembled power tool, right? That can do all the stuff, the other tools, but you have to assemble it first. And so you have to look at the instruction manual and figure out, how do I assemble this power tool? And so the person who uses a hammer and nails and saw, they can get started right away, and you might even see them making progress, and you're like, oh no, I haven't even started yet. But as soon as you have your power tool installed, you're going to surpass them by, a lot. So it's all a matter of how big the language is, and the language is quite big. So it's well worth the time to, figure out the mnemonic system. And then also it's fun. You were just talking about how, like, you were laughing and, like, coming up with humorous stories. I mean, how much more interesting is that than whatever, rote memorization type of method people might do. So there's that, there's that as well.
Yeah, and like I said, I found if I make it funny and a little bit kind of racy, then it's much faster to remember. The more conventional ones, because in the beginning I was doing more conventional stories, and then I'm like, nah, doing blow off ice skate blades. Yeah, bing.
Yeah.
I can remember that. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, right. And if you choose kind of flamboyant, like Freddie Mercury is my F1, and Samuel L. Jackson as Pulp Fiction with his gun so it's great. Like, he's always threatening people. And I remember in one of them, Luke said, there's always, fights and bloodshed. I'm like, but that works, so I guess I must have a more violent streak. Yeah.
Well, it's like, you get more advanced with it too, like in the sense that some of the memory champions, like the people who are really great at memory athletics and place very highly in the world memory championships, they'll say that when you start off, violence and sexuality are very useful to get started with because they're so easily memorable. Like, they're sort of our evolution has made us respond to both of those things very strongly. So, like, they're quite good. But when you get really advanced, like really black belt level memory stuff, is when you start to connect times where you felt deep emotion about something to your scene. So, like, and that could be something that isn't actually visual. It could be something just like the time you felt super elated because the person you were interested in accepted your invitation to a date or something like that, or a time your heart was broken, or a time you were you lost somebody close to you, or you had this great experience with somebody, and the emotion around that, if you can somehow manage to trigger that in the scene, that's super memorable. That's like the easiest thing to remember of all, but it's a little bit more complicated to figure out where.
Yeah, I'm still at the visual, like, my characters doing
and
stuff.
You need it to be visual. You got to have the props and the actor and the stuff like that. But sometimes if you can manage to be like, wow, Freddie Mercury, you reminded me of my that childhood time where my little league team won the baseball game, and then how excited you were, or whatever, something like that. So I was like, he's the coach of your little league team or something. Anyway, yeah, cool. So it's been great to talk to you, Lesley. I hope that you continue to succeed with the course, and assuming that you stick with it, I would love to catch up with you again in a couple of months and see how you're doing.
Yeah. No, you won't get rid of me that easy. Yeah. Fantastic. No, I really, really appreciate what you guys have done, and those Anki decks are unbelievable. The amount of work. The pronunciation one was really helpful. And just because I just don't enjoy making the cards. So
we know. We figured we'd make it for people, make it easy for them.
Yeah, so they're great. And then the sentences, seeing the stuff in context and hearing the native speakers is super helpful. The grammar building parts. So,
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Lesley, and I wish you luck moving forward, and we'll be in touch about seeing how you're doing in a couple months. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. 再见.
Bye-bye. 再见。
Bye.